The chandelier's glitter spilled across the marble floor like thousands of stars trapped inside a palace. Manhattan, a weekend night. The elite pressed shoulder to shoulder beneath the crystal dome of Hawthorne Tower, a newly christened symbol of power, flaunting itself even as it opened. Champagne lapped in their glasses. Million-dollar stories were traded behind half-smiles. In that proud air, a dry crack split the room. Crash! A crystal tray slipped from a hand and burst across the stone. Shards flashed like knives, skittering beneath polished shoes. The entire hall seized up. The jazz cut out, as if the room's very breath had been strangled. At the center of that silence stood Naomi Carter. Just 32, she wore a simple black server's uniform, a white apron splotched with a few streaks of wine. Her heart pounded hard, but her hands kept bending to gather each piece of crystal, as if the work were instinct. Naomi was no stranger to glittering light, but in this place, the light was not for her. She was only contract staff, unseen, hired to clean up someone else's shine. Laughter burst out, sharp as a blade. Richard Hawthorne, 55, tower owner, real estate billionaire, lounged back on his high chair. The champagne flute in his hand trembled under the lights. "Look," Richard called out, making sure the whole hall heard him. "A woman like her belongs on the floor, not on a dance floor, if she can manage a waltz." He paused, lip curling. "I'll marry my son to her right here." A wave of laughter rolled through. Men nodded as if watching a sideshow. Women hid their mouths behind satin fans, their eyes sparking with a cruel delight. "That's right. Let's see what those floor-scrubbing legs can do besides scrub. Oh, free entertainment for the evening." Each laugh drove another tack into her dignity. Naomi stayed on her knees, a shard nicked her fingers. A thin line of blood spread across her hand, but her face did not tremble. Ethan Hawthorne, 29, Richard's son, stood nearby. He frowned, stepped closer, and whispered, "Father, this is absurd." Richard flicked his hand as if batting away a fly. "Don't interfere, Ethan. This is the real lesson in class. You'll learn who deserves to rise and who belongs below." Naomi remained silent. The whispers gathered around her, little knives scoring flesh. "The black maid. Let her dance. She'll go down face first." Shameful. Each word poured oil on a slow fire. But Naomi let no one see the flames, only her eyes, calm, deep, like a dark lake that reflected none of their laughter. Richard stood, lifted his glass, and strode to the center of the room. His voice rang like a judge reading a sentence. "She isn't deft enough to hold a tray, so let's see if she can keep time. One waltz. If she does it, I'll marry Ethan to her. If not," he laughed, "she leaves here immediately, on her knees." The hall erupted again. Some clapped, some whooped, turning the moment into a collective sport. Naomi rose. Her hands were still beaded with blood, her apron stained, but her eyes shone with a different light. Not fear, not humiliation, an absolute composure, as if she were counting every beat, every breath in the room. She let the silence stretch until the hall itself grew taut. Then, in a voice clean and clear as a blade cutting the air, she said, "I accept." The echo traveled, striking the marble walls and ringing off the crystal, still intact. The hall fell mute. Even the band stopped, turning to look without meaning to. Richard blinked. He thought he'd misheard. "What did you say?" Naomi gave a faint smile. "I said I accept your challenge." A hiss of chatter raced out like fire through dry grass. Many laughed louder, convinced this would be the best joke of the year. But a few, very few, caught the strange light in Naomi's eyes. It was not the light of a maid. It belonged to a stage. In that moment, Naomi was no longer the one picking up broken pieces. She became a mirror, reflecting the room's cruelty at itself. And when she spoke again, low and steady, the ones laughing felt their throats tighten. "But if I dance better than your wife, you will keep your word. And in front of everyone here, You will apologize to me for scorning my skin and my work." The hall exploded once more, but it was no longer only laughter. Threaded through it was an alarm and doubt. That night, a mockery that seemed harmless cracked into a fault line that would split the Hawthorne Palace in two, just waiting for Naomi to step through. The room froze after Naomi's declaration. Eyes locked on her, some startled, some dripping with contempt. A few laughed, not because it was funny, but because they were convinced this would be the cheap circus act that would spice up an otherwise predictable evening of privilege. Richard Hawthorne threw his head back and laughed. The laugh of a man used to commanding, used to others bowing. He swirled his champagne glass, his voice dripping with disdain. "She wants respect. Respect for her skin. Respect for scrubbing floors. Very well, I'll give her a chance, but this chance will be her final sentence." He turned, lifted his arm like a man directing a play. "Listen well, everyone. Place your bets. $500 if you believe Claudia, my wife, will win. 1,000 if you dare place faith in the Black Maid." Laughter erupted, rolling like surf. Leather wallets appeared. Crisp bills changed hands. Cruelty became a game, a collective amusement. A salt-and-pepper-haired man whispered to his friend, "Well, this is entertaining. You don't often see a black cleaning girl challenge high society." The other man chuckled, "Exactly. And she'll fall flat on her face. That's the part worth watching." Claudia Hawthorne, Richard's imperious wife, rose. A silver gown clung to her body like armor. She stepped onto the floor, her lips curled in a mocking smile. "Richard, you really want me to lower myself to compete with this girl?" she sneered, pointing at Naomi. "Don't be modest, Claudia," Richard replied, smug. "You've won waltz trophies at the finest clubs. For you, this is just a warm-up. For her," his eyes raked Naomi up and down, "this will be the final fall." Naomi said nothing. She stood tall, wiping the dried blood on her hand with her white apron. Her eyes didn't lower to the floor or rise to the ceiling. They fixed on Richard, cutting through his jeers. Ethan, his son, stepped forward again, his voice strained. "Father, this has gone too far. She's just doing her job. This isn't right." "Silence, Ethan," Richard cut him off, his tone cold as steel. "You're too soft. That's why I must teach you order. This world has rules, who's on top, who's beneath. And women like her," he jerked his chin toward Naomi, "must know their place." The words fell like a racial decree. Some guests nodded, as if affirming a truth they secretly believed. Others shifted uneasily but kept quiet. No one dared confront Richard Hawthorne in his own domain. Naomi closed her eyes for a beat. In that instant, she heard the voices of the past. The doctor saying she would never dance again. The newspapers whispering her career was finished. And now the laughter of the white elite, treating her as a spectacle. When she opened her eyes, her voice rang clear, unshaken. "If I win, you won't just honor your word about the marriage. You will stand here, before this entire hall, and offer an apology. Apologize for scorning my skin. Apologize for turning my work into a joke. You will admit, in front of everyone, that you were wrong." Gasps swept the room. A few people drew sharp breaths at her boldness, but most burst into harsher laughter than before. "Did you hear that? She wants a billionaire to bow." "Delusional. This will be the funniest show of the year." Richard sneered, his eyes glinting with cruel delight. "You've got nerve, I'll give you that." "Very well, I agree. But when you fail, and you will fail, you'll be on your knees, scrubbing this floor in front of us all. Every spill, every shard of crystal, with your bare hands. And then you won't just lose your job, you'll lose the last shred of dignity you cling to." Claudia smirked, turning as if victory were already hers. Ethan turned away, fists clenched tight. He knew his father had turned this night into a hunt, and Naomi was the prey. Naomi drew a deep breath. She could hear her own heart, not quaking, but drumming like a war beat. She knew this was no longer about winning or losing a dance. This was about proving that a black woman, stripped by prejudice and by tragedy, could still rise and stand tall. In that moment, the hall transformed into a Roman arena. The elite sat as spectators in the tiers, Richard as the whip-wielding gladiator, Naomi as prey pushed into the center. But only Naomi knew this prey carried the memory of an artist, memories that once brought thousands to their feet in reverent silence. A middle-aged woman in the crowd leaned toward her companion, whispering, "I almost see no fear in her eyes. They're different, almost like—" Her friend cut her off with a laugh. "Don't kid yourself, she's just a cleaning girl." But Samuel Brooks, the head of security, stood at a distance, his gaze steady on Naomi with a gravity no one else possessed. He saw what the rest of the hall had yet to recognize. This woman was not stepping forward out of humiliation, but entering with the calm of someone who knew precisely what lived in her blood. Richard raised his glass, voice booming like a bell. "So it's settled. The bets are laid, the terms are clear. Prepare the waltz and prepare for the collapse of an illusion." Applause broke out, laughter rippled like surf. But amid the tide, Naomi stood motionless, back straight, her eyes still as stone. Amid the chaos of wagers, clinking glasses and drunken jeers, something quiet stirred, a vow deep within Naomi's chest. Tonight she would not dance merely to prove her worth. She would dance to expose the truth the powerful had tried to bury. And when the lights focused on the center of the marble floor, Naomi stepped forward. Each stride is no longer that of a contract worker. They were the steps of someone walking into history, ready to turn mockery into judgment against those who created it. When the light struck the marble floor, Naomi stood still, letting the noise around her dissolve. The laughter, the wagers, the jeers, all of it faded into a haze behind her. Inside her mind, other sounds began to rise, the sounds of the past. A distant melody stirred in memory, the very waltz that once placed her name on the cover of art magazines. 10 years ago, the name Naomi Carter blazed across the world of ballet. Principal soloist of the American Ballet Theatre, one of the rare black women to break through the color barrier and stand at the heart of Lincoln Center. She had been called the wind of Harlem, blowing into America's soul. That night, thousands of spectators had risen to their feet. Roses had rained down on the stage like a storm. Critics wrote, "She does not dance, she flies." Every movement of Naomi's is a prayer, a proof that the human body can defy gravity itself. She was only 22. Hair swept high, eyes alight, pirouettes that spiraled into the depths of the audience's souls. The entire world of art stretched before her. From New York to Paris, from Tokyo to Vienna, the grandest doors waited to open for her. But glory often walks hand in hand with tragedy, and tragedy struck on a cold, rainy night. Naomi remembered. That night, she had just finished an exceptional performance before the political elite. A limousine carried her down the glittering avenue. She leaned against the glass, lips still trembling with music. The world then felt boundless, unstoppable. Then came the blinding headlights, the screech of brakes, the brutal crash. Everything shattered. She sank into darkness for 3 months. When her eyes opened again, she was in a stark white hospital room, the sharp sting of antiseptic filling the air. Her body refused to move. Her legs, the very legs that had built her legend, were nothing but heavy, numb columns. The doctor laid a hand on her mother's shoulder, his voice grave. "She'll be lucky if she walks normally again." "Dance? No, forget it." Naomi heard him. Each word landed like a blade. But no one knew that inside she was screaming, "No, I cannot lose this." The world outside, however, did not wait. The press wrote terse notes. Ballet star Naomi Carter, career ends after accident. Performance contracts were cancelled. Her name faded from the prestigious rosters, replaced by newer faces. Audiences who once applauded turned away, seeking the next star. Naomi began endless days in physical therapy. Each step was torture. Her legs trembled, collapsed, bled. But in her eyes, a flame refused to die. If I cannot dance as before, I must still learn to stand. 5 years passed. Naomi could walk, even jog slowly. But ballet, no one believed. No theatre dared give her a chance. To survive, she laid aside the stage lights and took the simplest jobs: serving, cleaning, carrying trays. Hands that once traced exquisite arcs now gripped rags. Feet that once soared through the air now dragged down hotel corridors, restaurant aisles, and office halls. Each night she secretly practiced a few movements in her tiny room. Her legs ached, her body stiff, but still she turned, one pirouette, then two, then a fall. Tears came, but her eyes never let the fire go dim. That was the memory Naomi carried into this night. When Richard Hawthorne mocked her, when Claudia smirked, when the whole hall erupted in laughter, Naomi heard not only them, she heard all the old voices, the doctor, the press, society itself, every one of them declaring in unison, "You will never return." And in the silence, Naomi whispered to herself, "They were wrong once, they will be wrong again." Ethan, standing at the edge of the floor, saw something different in her. She was not a server dragged into a cruel game. She was a warrior stepping into her final battle. A woman in the crowd whispered, "Why is she so calm? If it were me, I'd have run away already." Her companion laughed. "She's just pretending. Once the music starts, she'll show her true self." But Samuel Brooks, the head of security, never took his eyes off Naomi. He remembered seeing those eyes once before, on the stage of the National Theatre. Eyes that did not belong to a servant. They were the eyes of an artist, someone who had touched the soul of an audience. Naomi drew a deep breath. The weight of a lost decade pressed on her shoulders, but instead of crushing her, it hardened into armor. Every bead of sweat, every drop of blood, every cruel laugh, they had all condensed into a strange, unshakable strength. She would not dance tonight to prove she could still move. She would dance so children of color could see hope. She would dance for her mother, who wept beside her hospital bed. She would dance to uproot the contempt of Richard, of Claudia, of the entire hall. Before the music began, Naomi already knew this night would not merely decide her fate. It would stand as an indictment against those who believed skin and class defined a human being. She closed her eyes gently. In the darkness, she heard again the applause of years ago, the scent of roses falling on stage, the music surging in her blood. And when she opened them, her gaze blazed, bright as if darkness had never managed to bury it. The hall did not yet understand, but Samuel did. Ethan was beginning to sense it, and Naomi herself knew with certainty. Tonight, the buried memory would rise again. The music had not yet begun, but the air in the hall had grown heavy, thick. Whispers rose from the gilded seats, like a flock of crows pecking away at every shred of Naomi's dignity. Every gaze was fixed on her, as if the crowd were waiting for the instant she stumbled, ready to clap and laugh. Naomi stood tall, her hand still marked with dried blood from the shattered crystal. Her gaze was unnervingly calm, enough to quiet a few sneers in the crowd. And then from the edge of the floor, a figure stepped forward, slow, deliberate, as if he had spent his whole life accustomed to being overlooked. Samuel Brooks. A black man, 65 years old, wearing a dark blue security uniform worn thin at the shoulders. He wasn't tall nor imposing, just a lean frame, back bent slightly by time, black shoes worn down from decades of standing guard at doors others passed through without notice. To the elite, he was nothing more than a doorkeeper, unseen like furniture. But his eyes were not unseen. They shone solemn, carrying the weight of memory. Samuel moved closer, pretending to check the radio in his hand. He leaned in, whispering just loud enough for Naomi alone. "You are Naomi Carter, aren't you?" Naomi startled. That name, she had buried it for years, hidden it like an heirloom beneath the soil of forgetfulness. And now, in a room filled with cruel laughter, someone had spoken it aloud. "You've mistaken me," Naomi answered softly by reflex. Samuel's gaze held steady. "No, I know. I once stood guard backstage at the National Theatre. The night you danced, Giselle, I was there. I saw the whole hall rise to its feet. That look in your eyes, the way you turned. It could be no one else, and tonight I see that look again." Naomi froze. Her breath quickened. For years she had lived under another name, in menial jobs, shielding her past like armor against the world. But with a single sentence, Samuel stripped that armor away, exposing the old wound still bleeding beneath. His voice lowered, urgent. "The world believes you died in that accident. The press wrote that Naomi Carter would never stand on a stage again. But I know truth doesn't always stay buried. You are not a maid. You are an artist. And tonight they are trying to tear away your dignity. But if you dance, you can tear away their mask." Naomi looked up at him. In his eyes there was no pity, only faith. A rare faith she had not felt in years. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. But inside that tremor was the heartbeat of someone about to rise. Samuel glanced at Richard Hawthorne, busy scooping up bets like a market hustler. Then he murmured, "After you dance, whatever happens, I will record it. I will keep the proof. I won't let them twist the truth again. They may have power, but we have the truth, and truth must be seen." Naomi lowered her gaze to her own hand. Minor cuts, calluses from years of scrubbing floors, and nails cracked. She thought, these are no longer an artist's hands. But then she remembered the eyes of audiences 10 years ago, and the eyes of Samuel now. They were the same. They believed. She nodded gently. "All right, but you must promise. When I dance, you will not just record me. You will record them. Capture Richard's face when his own words chain him. Capture each laugh, turning to silence. They must see the truth of themselves." Samuel pressed his hand to his chest as if swearing an oath. "I promise." In that moment, amid the sea of privilege, two invisible souls, a weary guard and a young maid, sealed a pact, not written on paper, but carved in memory and dignity. Ethan, standing not far away, caught the exchange of glances. He didn't fully understand, but his instincts told him something vital was about to unfold. Meanwhile, Richard carried on gleefully. "Place your bets. $1,000 to any fool who thinks this black maid will last on her feet. I wager she'll collapse in the first round." Laughter burst forth again, but Naomi no longer heard it. In her mind, the music had already begun. Invisible strings stretched between memory and the present, trembling. She thought of her mother, the woman who once sat in the audience, tears falling as her daughter soared across the stage. She thought of herself in the therapy room, falling, rising, falling, rising again. Each time I stood up, it was a declaration. I am alive. I am not finished. Naomi turned to Samuel, whispering, "Tonight I don't dance for them. I dance for the truth." Samuel smiled faintly, "And truth will make them bow." The orchestra struck a few test notes. Claudia Hawthorne stepped forward, flaunting warm-up moves, drawing polite applause from some. Richard laughed, raising his glass to toast his wife. But behind them, Naomi closed her eyes. The last time she had done so was 10 years ago, backstage at Lincoln Center. Now she closed them not to escape, but to return. When she opened them again, her dark eyes carried a different light. A light no longer buried, the light of an artist who had fallen and was ready to rise. And Samuel knew their pact had begun to take shape. The orchestra swelled. the first notes falling like a sheer silk curtain across the space. Light converged on the center of the dance floor, heads turned, expectant, and then Claudia Hawthorne stepped forward. The 48-year-old woman, in a silver evening gown, her chest thrust high, had crimson lips curled into a self-satisfied smile. She didn't just walk, she performed each step as if the marble floor had been built to showcase her. Claudia lifted her chin and waved lightly toward the audience. Applause rippled out, not from admiration, but as a courtesy born of a class long accustomed to clapping for one another. She began to spin, her waltz movements polished and precise but soulless. Arms raised, heels skimming, each gesture is like a sentence spelled correctly yet void of meaning. Guests nodded approvingly. Lovely, elegant. Claudia never loses her poise. The compliments rang like glass clinking, clear but empty. Richard stood at the edge of the floor, clapping too loudly, grinning with smug delight. There. That's real class. Tell me, how could a black maid ever measure up? Laughter answered, reverberating through the hall. Naomi stood at the rim of the floor, silent. She watched Claudia spin, glide, and bow. Everything flawless, flawless in the hollow way of rote perfection. And it was that very perfection that exposed the performance's falseness. Through Naomi's eyes, Claudia wasn't dancing. She was wielding the dance like a weapon, using it to reinforce the gulf between us and them. Every step Claudia placed on the marble sounded to Naomi like a declaration, "This is my floor. You will always belong to cleaning it." Applause followed Claudia's final turn. She dipped in a bow, smile widening, as if victory were already hers. The applause lingered, not in enthusiasm, but enough to preserve the host's pride. Claudia turned toward Naomi, contempt flashing in her gaze. "Your turn, don't worry, I won't feel insulted if you run off now." A few in the crowd chuckled. Richard seized the microphone, his voice booming. And now the performance of The Black Maid. Prepare yourselves for the finest comedy of the year. Laughter burst again, crackling like popcorn. Some guests pulled out their phones, cameras poised, eager to capture what they expected to be a spectacle. A clumsy girl stumbling, then collapsing across the marble. Naomi stepped forward. Not hurried, not boastful, one step then another, gentle but firm. Each footfall seemed to test the very weight of the air, slowing the space around her. Light bathed her trim figure in its plain uniform. For a moment, the hall fell silent. No one understood why that stillness pressed heavier than all the laughter that had come before. The DJ asked, voice strained, "What music would you like?" Naomi lifted her face. Her eyes glowed with a serenity hard to name. The same waltz, start again from the beginning. Richard barked out a laugh, clapping his hands. "Oh, she wants a second chance. How adorable." "Very well, give her that. Let's see how long she lasts." Laughter rolled once more, but Naomi did not look at them. She closed her eyes. For an instant, the entire hall vanished. Only the music inside her remained. In the corner, Samuel lifted his phone, his lens aimed not only at Naomi, but swept across the hall, the arrogant faces, the cruel smiles. He knew the real evidence wasn't just in her dance, but in the crowd's reaction when the truth struck. Naomi opened her eyes. Her first step touched the marble, soft, weightless, as if gravity itself had let go. In that moment, the whispers, the laughter, all receded. Claudia sank into her chair, arms folded, her smirk fixed. Richard raised his glass. Naomi's fall was inevitable moments away. But Naomi knew she had nothing left to lose. Every step would not be a dance. It would be an indictment. She drew a deep breath, and as the music began again, Naomi was ready to turn this cruel wager into the moment that reversed fate. The music began with slow, deliberate notes. The violin's warm hum whispered like wind slipping through a half-shut window. One beat, then another. Then the entire orchestra surged together, pulling the hall into a whirl of classical sound. Naomi placed her first step. The entire hall held its breath. At first she moved slowly, hesitantly. Her left foot faltered, as if her legs still carried the weight of the past. A few laughs burst out. "See, she's trembling." "Exactly, just like a child learning to dance." Richard Hawthorne laughed, his voice echoing across the chamber. "I told you, she'll fall any second." But Naomi did not fall. Her second step came with a gentle turn. The third, her arm lifted, fluid, flowing into the violin's rhythm. Each movement grew fuller, surer. The laughter began to fracture, replaced by puzzled frowns. Claudia sat rigid in her chair, her smirk still plastered on, but her eyes betrayed unease. She knew those movements did not belong to an amateur. Naomi spun again. Each turn sliced the air, silencing whispers. Her steps shed their hesitation, replaced by quiet confidence. Her arms no longer trembled. They painted sweeping curves, smooth as ink spilling across white paper. In the corner, Samuel's phone quivered in his hand. Not from fear, but from emotion. He whispered, only to himself, "She's truly back." Ethan, Richard's son, watched without blinking. In his gaze, shock turned to awe. He no longer saw a maid, no longer a joke, but an artist, stripping away her chains with every step. The music rose higher. Naomi entered the middle passage. She spun 3 consecutive pirouettes, moves that take ordinary dancers years to master. Her white apron flared into a perfect circle, soaring like a bird breaking free of its cage. A gasp rippled through the audience, no more laughter, only the sound of her shoes striking the marble in rhythm with the orchestra. Naomi no longer danced like a servant forced to entertain. She danced like her soul had found its voice. Every movement was not just technique, it was language. The language of pain, of pride, of resistance against prejudice. Richard was silent now. The champagne glass shook in his hand, liquid spilling over the rim. His once proud face froze, caught between ridicule and the creeping dread of truth. Claudia bit her lip. She realized her own performance, praised moments ago out of courtesy, now looked clumsy, hollow beside Naomi's every motion. Naomi surged into the climax of the waltz. She leapt into a grand jeté, her body slicing the air, suspended as if freed from the pull of earth. The hall froze. A black woman, in a plain uniform, had just soared across every prejudice they thought immovable. When she landed, she did not stop. She launched into a series of fouettés, rapid turns on a single leg, a feat of strength and mastery. She spun like a storm, yet her gaze remained steady, luminous, defiant. Whispers broke out. "Impossible. That's a professional dancer's technique. I've seen those moves before, but where?" Then a woman, an arts patron, cried out, "Yes, that's Carter, Naomi Carter. She performed at Lincoln Center. I'd know it anywhere." The room erupted in commotion. Phones lowered, not to mock, but to preserve a piece of history. Naomi knew she had reached the peak. She spread her arms wide, turned one final time. As the music softened, she halted, her body frozen in flawless form, arm raised, head high, eyes ablaze. Silence. A silence thick and heavy, so different from the hush when she dropped the tray earlier. Then silence born of scorn. Now silence born of awe. Not a single laugh, not a jeer, only the ragged breaths of those who had been so sure she would fall. And then from the corner applause burst forth. At first a solitary pair of hands, then another. Then the entire hall rose to its feet. The clapping thundered like a storm, rolling through the crystal dome above. Naomi remained still. She was breathing fast, but her eyes were calm. She did not smile, did not bow, not yet. She let the applause wash over her, as if she were witnessing the transformation of air itself, from mockery to reverence. Richard's face drained of color. Claudia pulled her hands back, nails digging deep into her skin. Ethan's lips curved into a quiet smile, not triumphant, but the smile of a man watching justice finally take shape. Samuel lowered his phone, his eyes brimming with tears. He whispered, "Gravity just let go, she's flying again." Applause still echoed beneath the crystal dome. Just moments earlier, Naomi had been nothing more than the Black Maid. Now the entire hall was on its feet, eyes wide as though they had witnessed something beyond imagination. Richard Hawthorne clutched his glass so tightly that wine spilled, dripping onto the floor. His face was frozen, Claudia's hands trembled, her red nails digging into the armrest. And Ethan, for the first time that night, exhaled, as if released from a nightmare. Naomi stood motionless at the center of the floor, her petite frame, her apron still stained with dried blood, yet her posture was regal, like a statue carved of pride. She did not smile, did not weep. She stood, letting the silence of the hall speak its own confession. And then, from the corner, a man's voice rang out, deep, steady, like a drumbeat. "Ladies and gentlemen," all eyes turned. It was Samuel Brooks, the head of security, still in his faded uniform. He stepped forward, phone in hand, eyes blazing. "Do you know who just stood before you?" he asked, his voice carrying, clear and strong. A few whispers answered. "The contract maid, who else? The one who just made us applaud." Samuel lifted his chin, his voice striking the crystal dome. "This is not a maid. This is Naomi Carter, former principal soloist of the American Ballet Theatre. The woman who turned the Lincoln Center stage into a sea of applause. The woman the world believed lost in an accident 10 years ago." A wave of sound erupted. Gasps, cries of disbelief, whispers tangled in chaos. Guests leapt to their feet. "Impossible. Carter is dead." "No, I remember. I've seen that dance. It is her. My God, a living legend." Faces once haughty were now pale. Some lowered their phones quickly, realizing they were no longer recording a farce, but had accidentally become witnesses to history. Claudia shot up, her voice trembling. "No. So, impossible. Carter could never come back. The press said so." Naomi turned, her eyes cold but composed. "The press has said many things, but the truth has never needed permission to exist." The uproar swelled. A prominent arts patron murmured, "I funded her Giselle performance that year. Those steps tonight, I remember every detail. No one but Carter could have done them." Richard's face blanched. He tried to force a smile, but his lips quivered. "It's just a coincidence. She could be imitating." "Don't be fooled." Samuel raised his phone and pressed the play button. A recording filled the hall, Richard's own booming, arrogant voice. "If she can dance a waltz, I'll marry her to my son right here. If not, she'll crawl from this hall on her knees and scrub the floor clean." The recording echoed through the room, undeniable. Richard's mocking laughter, his scornful words bound him in his own chains. His face flushed red, then drained white. He shouted, "It was a joke. No one took it seriously." Naomi stepped forward. Her voice rang sharp and clear, every word like a blade of ice. "No, Mr. Hawthorne, there are 200 witnesses here tonight, and now there is a recording. You demeaned me for my skin, for my work, for my past, and tonight you will answer for your own words." The hall held its breath. All eyes were fixed on Richard. He stammered, What do you want?" Naomi's gaze did not waver. "I want you to keep your word, and I want you to apologize, publicly, right here, for turning human dignity into a joke." A few guests nodded. Some began to clap softly. No one laughed anymore. Claudia looked around, seeing support shift toward Naomi. Her voice was bitter. "Richard, you've backed us into this yourself." Ethan stepped forward, facing his father at last, his voice firm. She deserves more than this evening. If you won't honor your word, then I will, in your place. Richard whipped around, roaring, "Be silent! If you dare defy me, you'll no longer be my son." Ethan did not move. He looked at Naomi, then back at his father. "Then I choose dignity, and you choose disgrace." The words fell like a hammer's blow. The hall erupted in murmurs. Some guests began to clap louder, as if justice itself had cracked through the walls once drenched in contempt. Naomi said nothing. She only looked at Richard. Her eyes held no rage, no fear, only the calm of someone who knew the truth had finally been unveiled. Samuel lowered his phone, a faint smile on his lips. He knew the battle wasn't over, but the turning point had arrived. Her identity had exploded into the open. From this night on, no one would dare call Naomi the Black Maid. She had returned, not just with her dance, but with the truth. The hall still roared with applause, tangled with murmurs, but through the chaos, Naomi's voice rang out, clear as a bronze bell in a cathedral. "Mr. Hawthorne, it's time to keep your word." Richard stiffened. Before hundreds of eyes, he forced a crooked smile. "You actually believed that?" A drunken jest. Who would take it seriously? "Ladies and gentlemen, surely you don't expect me to marry my son to someone like her." He pressed on the words "like her," twisting them to mean Naomi's skin and her work. But this time, instead of laughter, uneasy murmurs rippled through the hall. Eyes that once joined his mockery now wavered. Naomi stepped forward. Light caught her face, sharpening the calm authority etched there. "No, Mr. Hawthorne, this was no jest. This is accountability." She paused, each word striking the air like a blade. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You made my skin a punchline. You turned my work into a stain. You mocked my dignity. And now you will do one thing to set it right." Richard frowned, straining to keep his voice sharp. "And what is that?" Naomi drew a deep breath, her voice ringing like a verdict. "Apologize publicly, here, before them all." Silence. Guests in the front rows glanced at each other. A few nodded, as if conceding her demand was just. Richard burst out laughing, a harsh and broken sound. "You're mad. A Hawthorne never bows to someone from the bottom rung." Ethan stepped forward, voice firm as stone. "Father, this isn't about top or bottom. This is about truth. And you're standing on a lie." Richard snarled, "Silence! You dare defy me?" Naomi never turned toward Ethan, nor the crowd. She fixed her gaze on Richard alone. Her voice was low, but weighted with judgment. "You taught your son that power gives you the right to diminish others. But tonight, that very power is stripping away your mask. You think you control this room. The truth is, this room is watching you. Bah, not me." From the corner, Samuel raised his phone, the screen glowing. His voice rang out, rough but resolute. "And beyond this room, millions more will see. I've recorded everything. The dance, your words. You can deny us here, but you cannot deny the world." A collective gasp. Guests craned their necks, whispering, "He recorded all of it? My God, if this goes online." Richard's face blanched. He spun toward Samuel, voice cracking with rage. "Who are you to—" Samuel cut him off, voice like steel. "I am a doorman. For 20 years I've watched the powerful walk past, sneering at men like me. But tonight I hold more than the door. I hold the truth." Scattered claps broke out, then multiplied, swelling into applause. This time, it was not for Richard, but for Samuel and for Naomi. Naomi turned back to Richard, her eyes no longer challenged, they judged. "You thought to make me a spectacle, but the spectacle is over. Now only 2 choices remain. Apologize, or let the world see you for who you truly are." Richard trembled. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his knuckles whitened around the microphone. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. Claudia tugged at his arm, whispering, "Richard, stop. The more you resist, the deeper you bury yourself." But Richard shoved her off. He roared at Naomi, "Don't think you've won. I may lose a few contracts, but I will never bow to someone beneath me." The hall shook. His words landed like iron, heavy and raw. Some guests frowned. Others leapt to their feet in protest. Voices erupted from all sides. "Enough, Richard. You're humiliating yourself. Apologize. What are you waiting for?" Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between his father and Naomi. His voice thundered. "If you won't apologize, then I will. And I'll make sure the world knows not every Hawthorne is like you." A wave of applause exploded, fierce and rolling through the hall. Naomi remained silent, but her gaze softened as it fell on Ethan. Then she turned back to Richard, her voice quiet but hard as stone. "This isn't about me. It's about you. An apology doesn't steal your honor. It only returns a fragment of your humanity. But if you refuse, then your silence will be the heaviest sentence of all." Richard opened his mouth, but no words came. He looked around and saw the contempt in the eyes of guests who once flattered him, saw the disappointment in Claudia's eyes, saw the steady, unflinching defiance in Ethan's, and at last saw Naomi's calm, luminous gaze, the gaze of the woman he once deemed unworthy of a glance. In that instant, Richard understood. The power he once wielded had slipped away, not because of money lost, but because respect had vanished. Yet his pride stiffened. He turned his back, letting the microphone fall to the marble with a harsh, echoing clang, the final declaration of arrogance. Naomi did not follow. She stood tall, her eyes burning brighter than ever. She knew, even without his apology, the truth had been laid bare, and once revealed, truth would finish the work on its own. That night ended in chaos. Richard stormed out. Claudia followed in silence, face drained of color. But the hall didn't dissolve like any other lavish party. People clustered in small knots, arguing, dissecting. Screens glowed everywhere, short clips being shared on the spot. Samuel gripped his phone. He knew that with a single tap, the truth would escape these crystal walls and fly across the world. And he did it. The first video, 4 minutes long, went online that very night with the headline, "Billionaire Richard Hawthorne humiliates black janitor, and the truth silences him." By morning, all of New York was on fire. Major outlets ran the story in unison. Images of Naomi, in her plain uniform, spinning a pirouette across the marble floor, flooded social media. Hashtag Naomi Carter and accountability became global trends within hours. Another clip, Richard shouting, "A Hawthorne will never bow to someone beneath me," spread at breakneck speed. Millions of furious comments poured in. "It's 2025, and someone still says this. Unacceptable." Naomi isn't just an artist. She's living proof of the power of dignity. Richard Hawthorne just ended his own career. The national morning news led with the video. The anchor's tone was grave. This is not merely a story about a dance, it's a stark reminder that racism and class arrogance still exist, even in the brightest rooms. Up in the glass towers of Hawthorne Holdings, the air turned suffocating. The board called an emergency meeting. Major partners pulled out, with some even issuing statements. "We cannot work with a company whose leadership scorns human dignity." 3 contracts worth hundreds of millions were cancelled within 48 hours. The stock plunged. Shareholders erupted. A board member slammed the table and told Richard outright, "You haven't just cost us money, you've cost the company its honor. We cannot let you continue." Haggard and hollow-cheeked, Richard still raged. This is a setup, a smear campaign. But his own son, Ethan, rose and answered with a calm that cut deep. "No, father. This isn't a setup. It's the truth. And you said it yourself, in front of 200 witnesses." For the first time in his life, Richard realized external enemies did not besiege him, but by his own family, allies, and those who once worshipped his power. Meanwhile, Naomi's phone would not stop ringing. Arts organizations, theaters, Even Hollywood producers reached out. The press lauded a breathtaking return. Some called her the reborn legend. But Naomi did not smile. She didn't drink in the victory. When a reporter asked, "How does it feel to have the world applaud you again?" Naomi answered, "I don't dance for applause. I dance to remind them that dignity is not a bet." Her words were quoted everywhere. They became the slogan of swelling anti-racism marches in multiple cities. People carried signs that read, "Dignity is not for sale." Richard kept trying to fight back. He hired lawyers and threatened to sue Samuel for posting the clip. But the video had spread too far, copied and shared millions of times. There was no recalling it, no erasing it. On television, experts summed it up. Naomi Carter didn't defeat Hawthorne. He was defeated by his own arrogance and by a world that no longer tolerates naked contempt. Claudia, the wife who once glided through glittering galas at his side, quietly filed for divorce. She left New York for Europe, away from the storm. The tabloids howled, "Mrs. Hawthorne flees a collapsing empire." Ethan, by contrast, stepped before the press. In a brief statement, he said, "I'm sorry for what my father has done, but I believe from these ashes we can build something better." A company centered on social responsibility, not vanity. Applause followed. Many young people came to see Ethan as a symbol of a generation willing to surrender privilege to choose dignity. After days of silence, Naomi appeared at an elementary school in Harlem, the same place she had once taught free dance classes to children of color before life veered off course. When she stepped into the small studio, the kids rushed her, eyes shining. "Miss Naomi, we saw you online. You were amazing." Naomi knelt and gathered them close, tears spilling at last. For the first time since that night, she allowed herself to cry. A little girl asked, "Will you teach us to dance?" Naomi smiled, her voice catching. "Yes, and this time, no one will ever take your stage away." Richard sat alone in a stripped office under the cold neon glare. Newspapers littered the desk. Hawthorne forced to resign, the fall of an arrogant empire. He muttered hoarsely, "All because of a dance, because of a black maid." But deep down he knew. It wasn't the dance, and it wasn't Naomi. He fell because he forgot that power cannot lay a hand on truth. 6 months after that night, Manhattan had changed. Not its skyscrapers or its neon billboards, but a modest corner in Harlem. There, an old building, newly painted ivory, bore a simple inscription on its glass door, "Naomi Carter Center for the Arts." Inside, a piano's notes drifted. On a gleaming wooden floor, dozens of children, black, brown, Asian, and immigrant kids, practiced their first steps. Tiny ballet shoes tapped time, laughter rang bright, eyes sparkled. At the center of the room stood Naomi, no apron now, only a plain black practice set. She lifted a hand, gently adjusted a girl's posture, then stepped back and clapped encouragement. "Excellent. Remember, every step is more than movement. It's the voice of your heart." The children nodded, beaming. To them, Naomi wasn't just a teacher. She was living proof that even when the world tries to bury you, you can rise, dance, and shine. On opening day, hundreds arrived. Reporters crowded in, cameras flashed, but Naomi did not stand alone. Beside her was Samuel Brooks, the old security guard, now honored as the keeper of the door to truth. At the podium, he said, "I have seen many powerful people pass through a doorway, but that night I saw dignity walk in, and today I'm proud to see that dignity build a new door for every child." Applause swelled, not loud and showy like in a gilded ballroom, but warm, sincere. Ethan Hawthorne was there as well. No longer the heir to an empire, he was the center's first benefactor. He handed Naomi a bouquet of white flowers and said calmly, "This is the legacy worth passing on. Not money, not a name, hope." Naomi nodded and smiled. The tension of battle had left her eyes. In its place was the peace of someone who had found herself again. As for Richard Hawthorne, he slipped out of the city's glare. Now and then, the press reported, he'd been forced to resign, most of his wealth gone, wife divorced, friends turned away. Some spotted him in a dingy bar, eyes empty, mumbling nonsense. Naomi no longer spoke of him. She understood vengeance isn't watching someone fall. Proper vengeance is building something so beautiful that cruelty looks small and ridiculous beside it. That afternoon, as class ended, Naomi sat by the window, watching the children race and laugh. Outside, the sky blushed with sunset. A soft breeze lifted the white curtain. Samuel came over and took a seat beside her. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you know what I admire most?" Naomi turned, smiling. "What is it, Samuel?" He nodded toward the children. "Not that you won a dance, not that you made the world applaud. It's that you chose to plant seeds with your victory for the next generation. That is true nobility." Naomi followed his gaze. The children still laughed, still spun, still fell, and stood back up. She answered softly, "Sometimes we have to lose everything to find what matters most. I used to think I danced for audiences. Now I know I dance to give them faith that dignity never disappears." As the sun set, Naomi stepped to the door and looked up at the sign bearing her name. For years, she had avoided that name, hid it like a scar. Now it stood proud, glowing in Harlem's evening light. She drew a long breath and thought, "There is nothing left to fear. I've stood up, and this time I will never kneel again." That night, a photo swept across social media. Naomi standing among the children, one arm raised to lead, sunset pouring over her like a halo. Millions shared it with the caption, "When they turn dignity into a wager, answer with a masterpiece."